Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the special session on Red Sea crisis and India as a net security provider in the region. My name is Kalpana Pandey, a research associate at Indic Researchers Forum. Indic Researchers Forum is a security think tank focusing on issues pertaining to national security and politics. Since November 19, the Iran-backed Houthi group has attacked the commercial ships in Red Sea to disrupt the global trade. The Red Sea crisis is a spillover of the Israel-Hamas war and the larger geopolitical conflict between the West and Iran. The crisis has disrupted the global trade and negatively impacted Indian commercial interests as well. India has responded to the crisis by actively engaging its navy to secure the shipping lanes and has emerged as a net security provider in the region. Today, we shall be discussing the geopolitics behind the crisis and India's response through its naval capabilities. For this, we are honored to have Ambassador Srikumar Menon and Commodore Anil Singh as our key speakers. We are equally delighted to have Commodore Shrikant Deshmukh as the session chair. Commodore S.L. Deshmukh, Nausena Medal retired, has served in the Indian Navy for 32 years. He served on board ships and aircraft carriers. He is specialist on maintenance of fighter aircraft and anti-submarines warfare helicopters. He held many operational appointments on board ships and administrative appointments, including Principal Director at Naval Headquarters, Commodore Superintendent Naval Aircraft Yard, Director Naval Institute of Aeronautical Technology, and Project Director of a major naval aviation project. He is alumni of a Defense Services Staff College. Post-retirement from Indian Navy, he worked with Tata Group for 5 years and with Sun Group's Aerospace and Defense Vertical as a Senior Vice President for 12 years. He is currently in Pune, guiding SMEs in the region to undertake projects under Atmanirbhar Bharat policy in conjunction with the global OEMs. He is currently working with Manipal Institute of Technology and Manipal Academy for Higher Education as adjunct faculty. He is an avid writer and writes on defense, technical and geopolitical matters, an issue of common interest. His many articles have been published by C3SI, DRAS, and EJSSS. C3SI, Pragna Center for Research and KW Publishers have published his book titled Probable Sino-Russian Military Pact Implications for India and China's Game Plan in Ladakh Imperatives for India. Before I hand over to Deshmukh sir, I request the audience to kindly turn off their microphones and post their questions in the chat box, which will be taken up by the chair during the question and answer session. With this, I hand over the floor to Deshmukh sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Kalpana, for your introductory note.
Thank you, sir.
Honorable Ambassador Menon, Commodore Anil Singh, my seniors and friends, a very good evening. At the outset, I would like to compliment the Indic Researchers Forum for hosting this webinar on an important topic of the current Red Sea crisis. My thanks are also due to Indic for giving me the opportunity of chairing this session. The Red Sea is physically a narrow inland sea which forms a corridor between the Arabian Peninsula and Africa. The geopolitical position of the Red Sea makes it important and a vital route for the unarmed transportation of oil through the Bab el-Mandeb in south to the Suez Canal in the north. As long as oil remains the primary source of energy for the world, this shipping lane will remain a very vital channel for its transportation from the Gulf. Militarily also, it's a vital navigation route between nations and their global bases. And as such, it has become a theater where regional conflicts and competitions do play out. Economically also, the Red Sea has gained increasing in importance owing to the large oil reserves and reserves of many precious metals at the sea. It is also important for the overall security aspects. If we attempt an overview, free navigation through Red Sea is crucial to the trade and communication with Asia and Africa. The United States depends on Arabian Gulf oil transported through the Red Sea to power its factories, homes, and maintain its economy. It also ensures uninterrupted transportation of oil to the Western nations. The Red Sea access is also very essential to Russia, and it is the only year-round maritime link between the Europe and Far Eastern Asia. The Arab states also use the Red Sea as a tool to exert influence and put pressures on other regional players. It's a major trade route for its coastal states, especially Sudan, Ethiopia, Jordan, Israel, and Djibouti. With the Red Sea as the main export route for the Arabian petroleum, it is hugely important to their economies, with about 93 to 100% of total exports from some Arabian countries. India, too, is heavily reliant on this strait for its crude oil transportation, LNG imports, and the trade with West Asia, Africa, and Europe. The Red Sea route is shorter, faster, making it to be a preferred option for the most shipping companies in India. Thus, stability in this region would be of importance to all the above stakeholders. The Red Sea route has been relatively calm for past many years, but the recent spurt in the attacks, both in terms of numbers and the lethality, has become a cause for worry for many nations. The crisis apparently began in October 23 when Yemen's Houthi movement initiated, initiated a series of attacks targeting southern Israel and the ships in the Red Sea that it claimed were linked to Israel. The Houthi movement, aligned with Hamas, launched attacks on the Israel, employing missiles and unmanned aerial vehicles. However, ships with no apparent links to Israel were also targeted. Indian merchant vessels have also not been spared. Houthi militants had fired on merchant vessels of various countries in Red Sea off the coast of Yemen, in the Bab el-Mandeb Straits, a choke point for the global economy. This has had an inevitable impact, leading to the rise in transportation cost and the insurance liability for the ships, adversely affecting international trade and commerce and causing destination delays. Various reports suggest that post outbreak of Israel-Hamas war, Iranian supported militant groups across the West Asia, including the Houthis, expressed support for the Palestinians. In order to end the attacks in the Red Sea, the Houthis have apparently demanded a ceasefire in Gaza and an end to Israel's blockade of the Gaza Strip. The Israel-Hamas war and the Houthi onslaught in the Red Sea Suez corridor have brought a dangerous turmoil in the geopolitical scenario since the beginning of 2024, and its geopolitical impact has wider ramifications. Honorable Ambassador Menon would be a right authority to enlighten us on this particular aspect. Now, coming to India's position, many global analysts have expressed concern at so-called muted response to Red Sea crisis from India, as they feel that in globalized world, no country is immune for such geopolitical incidents, no matter how distant they might be. However, every country has right to protect its national interests, and obviously the Western world cannot expect India to join in their every crisis at the cost of its own interests. Analysts point out that at international level, India has refrained from joining the multinational operation despite invitations from United States. But it is also a matter of propaganda by the Western interest and the projections of views as seen through the polarized glasses. However, Indian government understand that we need to do more diplomatically, including working with the US and other countries to provide an effective response, especially in line with our aspirations to become an effective security provider in the Indian Ocean and the adjoining region. However, India's response reflects a careful assessment of the evolving situation, allowing New Delhi the time and a space to respond in a manner which allows it to maximize its own interests. In, in a recent visit by the Indian External Affairs Minister, Mr. Jaishankar, to Tehran, He raised the issue of attacks with his Iranian counterpart, highlighting how the fraud situation is not to the benefit of any party. It is also a matter of record that before the visit, Mr. Jaishankar had a call with US Secretary of State Mr. Blinken, with where the both sides expressed shared concerns over the reckless Houthi attacks in the southern Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden. Such diplomacy is characteristics of the New Delhi's tightrope balance between Iran and the United States. On the active front, Indian Navy has also not been silent or a mute spectator. India understands that the access to this area's sea route cannot be compromised at any cost. Though official statements are sparse, it has been reported that Indian naval ships have been deployed in the area and efforts by Indian Navy in the region have been appreciated by many nations for their alacrity and a quick response. I am sure Commodore Anil Jaising will educate us on this on the India's capabilities to deal with this crisis as it is emerging. With these opening remarks, I would like to invite Honorable Ambassador Menon to speak to us on the geopolitics involved in the current Red Sea crisis. Before I hand over the floor, I have the honor of introducing the Honorable Ambassador. Ambassador Srikumar Menon served in the Indian Foreign Service as Ambassador of India to the Republic of South Sudan from July 15 to April 2018. Ambassador to the Republic of Angola with residency Luanda from May 2018 to November 2019. He was also concurrently accredited as Ambassador to the Republic of Sao Tome and Principe during that period. Prior to the ambassadorial assignments, he served in different capacities at headquarters of the Ministry of External Affairs, New Delhi, and Indian missions, embassies in Muscat, Tehran, Khartoum, Singapore, Warsaw, and The Hague. Besides, undertaking a short, challenging special assignment in Baghdad in Iraq. He represented the Indian mission in Organization of Prohibition of Chemical Weapons in The Hague during 2010 and 2013. He worked on the UK and the Netherlands desk in the Europe West Division from 2013 to 2015. Post his retirement, he is supporting charity organization as a patron and providing freelance support as senior advisor and a consultant to the Indian corporates and consultancy companies. It's my utmost honor, Ambassador, to welcome you to the forum and request you to kindly deliver your talk to us. Thank you so much.
Am I audible? Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Namaskar, and a very good evening to each and every one of you. My greetings, my special greetings to you, Commodore Shrikant Deshmukh, Commodore Anil Singh, Professor Balakrishnan, and other team members from the Indic Researchers Forum. My greetings also to all friends and followers of Indic who have joined us online this evening. Thank you for the opportunity to be part of this interactive discussion platform. In fact, I consider it a privilege and an honor to be able to share space with such illustrious and distinguished officers from India's defense services, the Indian Navy specifically. And my compliments to Professor Bala and others in his team for organizing this very, very topical and interesting discussion. As I had mentioned to Professor Bala during our informal chat earlier this morning, both our distinguished panelists, Commodore Deshmukh and Commodore Singh, are in fact the most ideal and qualified persons to talk about this current crisis, which is impacting more or less the entire global maritime security and trading ecosystem. Both being senior decorated members of our naval establishment, they have had hands-on experience of naval operations, warfare, and conflict management on the high seas. So we indeed are in good hands, and we feel blessed for that. It will be a great learning experience for me personally, at least, and of course for our audience here in as well, to discuss and to listen to their views and perspectives. And I, for one, certainly cannot match the level of domain expertise and the finesse that the two naval stalwarts bring to the table today. But I will try my best, try to do my own bit in sharing my very humble perspective with you on this subject. So right away, so let's dive straight into the topic on hand, the Red Sea crisis. And with your permission, Professor Deshmukh, may I start? First, a brief
It's
background.
our honor, sir. Thank you. No problem.
Thank you. So first, a brief background of the events that led to the crisis in the first place. Historically speaking, in fact, at least in relative terms in the recent time frame, the Red Sea has been a flashpoint for piracy, hostage taking by pirates with involvement of non-state actors, military naval action taking place, retaliatory attacks, drug trafficking and weapon smuggling. You name it, everything has been there happening in the Red Sea. And in recent times, the recent times have in fact witnessed the rise of the so-called axis of resistance, the alliance among Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis, Iran, and other groups aligned against the Western powers. And from the security angle, the Red Sea is strategically important as it connects the maritime traffic between the Middle East and the Far East, as well as Europe and Asia. Many of these points were already included in your introductory remarks, Commodore Deshmukh. So I will not delve too much on it, but still I think for the sake of providing a background, I need to repeat all these things. And now to the genesis of the crisis and the latest spark that caused the crisis in the first place. As we all know, the military standoff in the Red Sea began on October of 19th last year, when members of the Houthi rebel movement in Yemen launched missiles and drones at locations in Israel in retaliation to the Israeli action against Palestinians in the Gaza Strip. And the Houthis are a Shia Islamist insurgent group backed by Iran, which control parts of Yemen. And ever since the October attacks, the Houthis have been consistently active in the area, raising the ante by announcing their intention to target ships in the Bab el-Mandeb Straits, again with something which was referred by Commodore Deshmukh in his earlier remarks. These were in support of the Iran-backed Hamas fighting Israel in Gaza. And they fired missiles against several ships in the Straits, besides firing missiles at Israel as well. And the situation escalated in mid-November when the Yemen-based Houthis started attacks on commercial shipping vessels in the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, seriously affecting global supply chains and grain shipments that were passing through the Suez Canal. So the US actually, in response, quickly constituted a group of top allied nations, which included, I think, 10 nations to be exact, which included UK, Bahrain, Canada, France, Italy, Netherlands, Norway, Seychelles, and Spain for keeping their navies on standby to deploy ships as and when needed to repel the attacks on the shipping lines which were transiting through Bab el-Mandeb in the Red Sea. To just give a background, the Bab el-Mandeb Strait has been under attack for some time, but the intensity of these attacks have increased more so in recent weeks. And the security situation around the strait has now become a full-blown, full-scale international crisis, bringing witness to increased tensions and incidents involving attacks and military actions by regional and global powers. So just to give a perspective on the geographical peculiarity of the hotspot, again, something which was referred to by Commodore Deshmukh earlier, the Bab el-Mandeb Strait connects the Gulf of Aden to the Red Sea. And to be more precise, the strait is actually located between Yemen in the northeast and Djibouti and Eritrea in the southwest. Our esteemed panelists with their naval experience would be more aware of the topography and physical features of the Bab al-Mandab Strait, which I understand is a 30-kilometer wide and 110-kilometer long narrow passageway in the Red Sea, which he had mentioned was a choke point, as Commodore Deshmukh had mentioned. And even in normal times, this area is seen as a bottleneck for maritime traffic entering and exiting the southern part of the Red Sea. Shipping industry watchers started expressing fears about the disastrous impact on global trade and supply chain bottlenecks amid the growing tensions in the Red Sea, with the Houthi group continuing their attacks on commercial and military vessels. And significantly, in the wake of the initial wave of attacks on merchant ships in the strategic region, the United States had reclassified and redesignated the Iran-backed Houthi rebel group as a global terrorist organization. So that was a very significant move by the Americans in the wake of the attacks. And then this was followed by the UN Security Council passing a resolution on 10th of January 24, which basically demanded that the Houthis immediately stop attacks on merchant commercial vessels in the Red Sea. The resolution was adopted by a vote of 11 in favor, and where there were about 4 abstentions. The abstainees were mainly Algeria, China, Mozambique, and Russia, quite unsurprisingly. The UNSC resolution called for the need for upholding freedom of navigation in the Red Sea, while demanding that the Houthi attacks cease immediately. However, unfortunately, the escalation in hostilities went a notch up when a month ago, on January of 19th, forces from the United States Central Command forces shot down 3 Houthi anti-ship missiles. And these missiles were allegedly aimed at shipping targets in the southern part of the Red Sea. These missiles, according to the US forces, posed a direct threat to merchant vessels as well as to US naval vessels operating in that particular region. And the US now continues to justify these counterstrikes as a preemptive action in neutralize and disable missiles fired by the Houthi rebels to protect and safeguard the shipping lines. And later on, of course, in response to the joint US and British-led airstrikes, the Houthis, on their part, declared all American and British interests as legitimate targets, reserving the right to take retaliatory action and bringing this entire crisis to a flashpoint. The US and the US and the UK have carried out 2 joint strikes on Houthi sites in Yemen while on its own. The US has also carried out 8 strikes in the past few weeks leading into this particular year from January onwards. So that in a way is where we are all at this point of time, an impasse, a stalemate of sorts, a pessimistic outlook with no real signs of the conflict ending anytime soon. So, Commander Deshmukh, should I continue or should I stop here, or maybe I can talk about the impact on global maritime trade later on, or should I continue?
Sir, we will be honored if you continue
Okay.
and give us the picture, because currently the picture for a general public is quite hazy,
Okay.
and we will be honored by your views on the subject, sir.
All right, all right. So, given the strategic location between the Asian and African continents, linking the Middle East and the Far East, as well as Europe and Asia, the Red Sea is an important shipping channel for several countries, and more so critically essential factor in terms of their economic well-being and their political stability. So the consistent and regular attacks on merchant vessels passing through the Red Sea route has, in fact, severely affected the maritime security in the Gulf of Aden and the western extension of the Indian Ocean itself. Ever since the attacks, global maritime trade has virtually gone into a tailspin. In fact, I would call it a meltdown, even causing anxiety, worry, and concern among leading players in the global energy market. And the main reasons for this reaction was, number one, the global supply chain disruption, Number two, the increased shipping costs. And thirdly, of course, a steep reduction in container ship transits through the region. In fact, supply chains have been severely affected, causing disruptions, shortages, and production delays in industries like automotives, FMCG, consumer goods, electronics, etc. So it's all snowballing to something very, very serious. In fact, almost 30% of the world's container trade passes through the Suez Canal. And so the crisis has had a direct impact in terms of disruptions in supply chains. And added to these are the fact that shipping costs are increasing, so much so that on some routes, the increase has been as steep as nearly fivefold, which does not make it feasible at all for shipping companies to send their goods. Major shipping industry players have temporarily suspended Suez transits, with, in fact, weekly container transits dropping by almost 66%. Almost half of the cargo of grain shipments that passes through the Suez Canal has now been diverted to the longer route, encircling the African continent through the Cape of Good Hope in the south. Commodity shipment carriers now choose to bypass and avoid the Suez Canal amid heightened security risks from the attacks, having to opt for the longer, more circuitous and more expensive alternate routes to reach their destinations. And last but not the least, an obvious impact has been on cargo insurance rates, which have registered steep increases in recent weeks. And I believe cargo insurance rates for ships to pass through the Red Sea have risen sharply by, I think, almost 3 times, from an average of about 0.6% to as high as about 2% of the cargo value. So this, in a nutshell, was how the world has been at the receiving end. And now let me briefly touch upon the economic challenges faced by some of the countries in the region. Right now, initially, it goes without saying that the crisis has seriously disrupted global trade, including shipments from India and other countries. For example, Egypt's revenues from the Suez Canal is already taking a severe hit. Egypt is, I think, estimated to have already lost about $500 million in Suez Canal revenues since the start of the disruptions. So that's a huge, huge hit for a country like Egypt, which is also not so economically in good health. Ethiopia, Somalia, and Kenya, and other African countries, for example, are heavily dependent on the Suez port for their shipments, and are most susceptible given the negative impact from a possible long-term interruption of wheat imports. Now, food is something which they are dependent on through imports from other countries, and something which many fear could even escalate into a full-blown food and energy crisis in the African continent. An immediate impact already being witnessed in Europe is in the automobile and ancillary units, where raw materials and parts are in short supply due to the shipment delays. And the losses and costs will keep mounting in coming days, and the months following will basically predict the eventual unfolding story. But unless the crisis abates and shipping services feel confident of reverting to the pre-crisis modes of operations, things are going to be very, very bad for the shipping industry. Now I'll come to the specific impact on India and later on as we go on. But now what are the options alternative options which are available to the world to overcome the current shipping logjam? In the wake of these restrictions on this Red Sea route, cargo goods like food, plastics, chemicals, and electrical equipment, which are shipped from ports in the UAE and Bahrain, pass through Saudi Arabia and Jordan before reaching Israel and further on to Europe. Similarly, cargo from India, Thailand, South Korea, and China are being sent by trucks in recent times. So the United States is supporting a new project that envisages a Middle East land corridor as a possible solution to get over this bottleneck. And many see this as a viable and practical alternative to the Bab el-Mandeb Red Sea route, even though a lot depends on all the parties coming together. So that's where the challenge is. And this newly proposed alternative land corridor, providing the option of land connectivity by trucks, will be used to transport cargo from the Gulf along a route that passes through the UAE, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, and eventually will be terminating at the Haifa port in Israel. Most importantly, it would result in substantial savings in terms of cost as well as time. So that is where it's the most appealing proposal for all the players in that particular region. And it is believed that cargo could be delivered in 4 to 5 days compared to the 2 weeks it normally takes for transportation by the hitherto existing traditional shipping route. So that's a substantial savings in time also. And of course, the concomitant savings in cost as well. And if the concerned nations and parties having a stake in this project eventually agree to cooperate, this project will truly be a viable option for commercial shippers and traders to evade and at least circumnavigate the insecure, crisis-ridden routes and hotspots in the Red Sea. It provides a very good alternative for them. But then the question remains whether the Arab countries are at all in a mood to even reconsider their anti-Israel political stance for their own commercial considerations. So that's a moot point, and that's where the challenge remains. Saudi Arabia, for example, would certainly benefit commercially from the project if it comes on board, as it provides a lifeline for uninterrupted movement of cargo from Jeddah port, which in the present scenario, in current circumstances, is in danger of being alienated from the global economy altogether because of the Red Sea scenario. So it also goes without saying that this proposed Middle East land corridor, a concept driven by the United States, will certainly be a shot in the arm for the IMEC initiative, the India, Middle East, Europe Economic Corridor project, which is a partnership between the European Union, India, Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, the US, and other G20 partners, which was, an initiative which was signed during the last G20 summit here in New Delhi. So now let me talk about the Indian perspective on the crisis. So I am now coming back to which all affects us actually, more about the concerns for India and Indian exporters in particular. And the Indian economy is directly, as we all know, directly impacted by this ongoing conflict in the Red Sea, with increased costs for Indian imports, especially crude oil, electronic components, fertilizers, for example. While most of the shippers have suspended their operations, some cargo freight carriers and vessels are now faced with the dilemma of having to take a detour around the Cape of Good Hope in southern Africa, which I had mentioned earlier, and which actually translates into an additional 5,000 to 6,000 kilometer longer trip, resulting in a almost 25 to 30% increase in freight and insurance and other related costs. So again, that's a substantial amount that importers and exporters have to pay. On the other hand, supply of sunflower oil, which has a large consumption in India, has become a challenge for us here due to the high cost of rerouting of cargo ships through this other channel passing through the Cape of Good Hope. So from India's perspective, the immediate fallout from this conflict has been the growing concern among Indian exporters as shipments get delayed and become more and more costlier. And following the escalation of the crisis to a more compelling and serious level in mid-January, the entire government setup got into action. The government set up an interministerial panel specifically to monitor the Red Sea crisis. And the panel is headed by the Commerce Secretary and has representatives from the Ministries of External Affairs, Defense, Shipping, and the Financial Services. So from India's economic perspective, the crisis caused by the Red Sea attacks will definitely have a negative impact on the Indian government's trade and export targets. And overall economic growth picture will surely be skewing the trade data and the numbers in the last quarter of this current financial year, something which the government seriously wants to avoid. But these are things which initially, at least for the time being, are not in the control of the government. But I think the government is fully seized of the matter, and a lot of measures are being taken, which I will come to later on in my talk. Then we talk about the rise in fuel, petrol, and diesel prices since December, which normally again is a critical factor in government's efforts to control inflation. Shipment delays and supply chain disruptions are also impacting on import-oriented industries, which are dependent on raw materials for goods manufacturing and petrochemicals. In fact, container costs I had mentioned earlier that have also registered five-fold increases in the past 3 to 4 months. Exporters who have to execute CIF contracts with their counterpart importers abroad, covering cost, insurance, and freight of cargo, are faced with steep increases in shipping and insurance costs. Something again which the exporters find it very difficult to absorb, and these, especially the small-time exporters. For them, it's a question of survival, and these margins, they are working with very little margins for them. So an increase of this nature will basically kill their entrepreneurship completely. And this crisis has intensified the pressure on global supply chains, and Indian importers and exporters have reacted at a time when restrictions are already in place for blocking transit through the Black Sea due to the Russia-Ukraine conflict. And if you may allow, a most telling statistic one notices is that the Suez Canal, which connects the Mediterranean Sea and the Red Sea, and by extension connects Europe and Asia, has registered a substantial 40% drop in traffic since November following the Houthi attacks. So this is again a background of how India is affected, how the Indian exporters are affected. But now let me briefly touch upon the impact on specific industrial sectors in India. Exporters of agriculture products like rice and perishable items, products produced like fruits, they're all already reeling under the high increase in freight costs, not to mention the accompanying delays and uncertainty over the shipments. Talking about the pharma sector, they are also facing delays in receiving supplies of life-saving drugs and other essential medical supplies. Exporters of textile items and apparel manufacturers face the challenge of falling short on promised deadlines, leading to heavy penalties being levied for delayed cargo delivery to their clients abroad. So all in all, this was what I would like to say about the impact. And now let me now change tack and talk a little about India's naval and diplomatic moves to monitor this Red Sea crisis. I do hope I have time to talk about this also. Commodore Deshmukh, can I proceed?
So will 5 minutes be okay with you?
Yes, 5 minutes is good enough for me. Thank you. As you are aware, as Commander Deshmukh had also mentioned earlier, the Indian Navy has deployed more than 10 warships, 2 of them primarily for anti-piracy operations, and the remaining for anti-drone support, covering the northern coast of the Somalia and the Bab al-Mandeb, the north and the central Arabian Sea, and the east coast of Somalia. following an attack on a cargo vessel near the Indian coast on 26 December. Two Indian naval ships, destroyers INS Kochi and INS Kolkata, were dispatched to the Gulf of Aden. And in mid-January, Foreign Minister Jaishankar had visited Tehran to hold consultations with Iran on the deteriorating situation in the Red Sea, while also reaching out to other stakeholders. And notably, in my view, most importantly, India has not joined the US-led coalition. Instead, it has chosen to deploy its own naval frigates to monitor the sea routes and chartered out its own independent approach to this crisis. And the Red Sea situation also formed a part of the appeared during the discussions between PM Modi and French President Macron during his state visit to India last month. So these are some of the measures which were taken by the Indian establishment, basically as an outreach to containing this crisis. And what I would say is that we also have, as part of the diplomatic and military leadership role that is being envisaged by India, is for security of the Indian Ocean sector in its proactive initiative known as by the acronym SAGAR, meaning security and growth for all in the region. The SAGAR is a very important pillar of India's foreign policy. In fact, an extension of which can be seen in other recent initiatives called the Indo-Pacific Oceans Initiative, which is again based on SAGAR, that envisions the building of a rules-based regional architecture. And some other security challenges in the Indian Ocean region also relate to climate change and transnational crimes, drugs and arms trafficking, piracy, again, food shortages, disease and famine, and other things. But one last point which I would like to mention, which Professor Balakrishnan had mentioned that I should be talking about, is India as a net security provider. The Indian Navy has often been labeled as a net security provider, a description that has evolved over the years as a result of the consistently proactive role it has played as the first responder during maritime disasters. And the Indian Navy has all along been a strong enforcer of the principle of maritime domain awareness in the high seas. So something which you two officers can be very proud of, having implemented that very principle, or having at least been part of that enforcement operations. Thus, we can say that India is now truly established as a resident naval power in the Indian Ocean. And in fact, our own defense minister has often highlighted and praised the role played by the Indian Navy in helping to project India as a regional power and a net security provider in the Indo-Pacific. And this is based on the Navy's solid track record of demonstrating its capacity and capability of providing humanitarian assistance and disaster relief to citizens, as well as to our own nationals, as well and also to the regional partner nations. So India is dependent on the Indian Ocean for its commercial and non-commercial shipping, trade and tourism and other things, which is an important component of its economy. And thus, the Indian Navy's interest and influence extends to the entire Indian Ocean, beginning from the Andaman Sea to the eastern coast of Africa. And as I said before, the Indian Navy is recognized for its remarkably quick response. It has shown particularly during crisis situations, like, for instance, Operation Rahat in Yemen in 2015, Operation Sankat Mochan, of which I myself was a part of during my stint in South Sudan. And Operation Yemen is one particular, it was a huge exercise where the Indian Navy collaborated with the Indian Air Force and Air India to rescue and evacuate Indian citizens from Yemen during the military intervention launched by Saudi Arabia. There are numerous other examples which I would not like to go on because of the shortage of time. One example which straight away I remember is Operation Dost, which is the latest expression of being first responder as a net security provider, where we have enforced this principle of humanitarian assistance and disaster relief as a response to our neighbors in the region. And Operation Dost was launched in February. They were, where during the wake of the earthquake which affected Turkey and Syria. Domestically also, in 2015, India, the naval operations, Operation Madad was launched in 2018 in Kerala during the floods, providing relief, much needed disaster relief to our people here in Kerala. So as part of the Operation Sakoon also, the Indian Navy had evacuated several Indian nationals, Sri Lankans and Nepalese nationals from the conflict zone in the Lebanon war. So there's no end to all these examples, but the fact remains that the naval establishment has made India proud, and these successful campaigns are testimony to India's growing disaster management capabilities. So there I would like to end, and at least maybe I can come back to other issues later on as we proceed. So sorry for taking so much time, and over to you, Commodore Deshmukh. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir, for covering a broad canvas in a short time. What you have covered is the what and how of the situation as of now, and you have really given us the scope of the activities which India needs to take on, and what is the experience Indian Navy has as we walk forward.
Yeah.
I'm sure, sir, this must have kindled a lot of minds, and I expect a few questions to come up. I'll be grateful, sir, if you could take on that questions at the end of the thing, sir.
Sure.
Thank you once again.
Thank you.
It's my honor now to welcome Commodore Anil Jai Singh. Commodore, sir, basically, Ambassador has given us the basic roots of the problem, and as I said, why. And he has also said that there's a basic requirement for the Indian Navy to take on the very difficult task in this area. We are very eager to know from you how of this particular problem which has been painted across by the ambassador, and listen to your experience and your forethought onto the capabilities of the Indian Navy. Before I hand over the mic to you, I would like to introduce Commodore Jai Singh. Commodore Anil Jai Singh is the Vice President of Indian Maritime Foundation, India's leading NGO in the maritime domain. He is also Honorary Fellow of the Foundation, a member of the governing body of the Society for Indian Ocean Studies, and the Vice President of the Navy Foundation of the Delhi chapter. He is also Senior Vice President of a leading European MNC. In his naval career, spanning 3 decades as a submariner, from which he took premature retirement in March 2011, he had the distinction of 5 afloat commands, including 4 submarines and a fleet ship, and a diplomatic assignment as a naval advisor in the United Kingdom, with his last appointment as the Deputy Assistant Chief Maritime in HQ IDS. A postgraduate of Defense and Strategic Studies, he takes keen interest in matters maritime and speaks and writes on the subjects in India and abroad. He has been a regular speaker at the international conference in Europe, Turkey, and Japan, and at the IISS in London and Singapore. He has participated in Track 1.5 initiatives on the expert panels of IORA, EAS, and the West Asia, and other bilateral and trilateral mechanisms. With his vast experience and his current association with the developments in and around India, he will be the right person to advise us on the naval capabilities and how we are going to tackle the Red Sea crisis as well. Floor is yours, Commodore. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir, for that very kind invitation and introduction. I'd like to thank the Indic Researchers Forum for giving me this opportunity to participate in this very topical discussion. We've already had Ambassador Menon giving us an extremely wide overview of the entire not only of the current crisis, but the regional overview, which gave us a very good perspective on why and the how and why of the crisis, as Commodore Deshmukh brought out. So most of what had to be said has already actually been said, but I will keep it short. So how much time do I have?
Commodore sir, there is absolutely no problem because, as I said, Ambassador has given it of the why the problem. Now, how Indian Navy has got the capability to tackle is the aspect we are eager to listen from you, sir. So 15-20 minutes should be quite all right. So no problem,
Well,
sir.
probably not take that long. I'll try not to be repetitive. There are a few points which Ambassador Menon already highlighted, so I'll try not to repeat those, but try and address the point you have made. So basically, in the next, I'll keep it about 10 minutes or so. I think I'm going to cover three aspects. One is, of course, the importance of the Indian Ocean, and I will focus more on the Indian Ocean and not so much on the Red Sea. Red Sea crisis, yes, but how it impacts the Indian Ocean. So the importance of the Indian Ocean and its unique features, which make it different from other oceans. Of course, then I will bring in, it's in the context of the Red Sea crisis, so I will bring in a little bit of description of that. And finally, will be about the Indian Navy and India as a net security provider in the region, which is what I was tasked to speak about. So I think there are 3 or 4 very distinguishing features about the Indian Ocean. Firstly, it is a critical waterway which connects the Atlantic Ocean to the Pacific Ocean. And that gives it a very unique sort of characteristic. Even though it's the 3rd largest ocean, its importance far outweighs its size. And that is why the Indian Ocean has almost 100,000 ships transiting annually through it, to and fro, carrying trade from the west to the east and vice versa. With the global geoeconomic and geopolitical shift to the Indo-Pacific from the Euro-Atlantic, and the Indo-Pacific region accounting for almost over 60% of the global GDP, and with 2/3 of the global population resident here, this region has become extremely important. And that has led to not only a lot of concern within the region and various strategies being articulated by countries resident in the Pacific and the Indian Oceans, but also Eurocentric countries like the Netherlands, Germany, the EU, and even Canada, which has now got an Indo-Pacific strategy. All of them, of course, aim primarily at addressing their concerns with their trade and security in the region, mainly the security of their trade and energy. As far as the security of that trade goes, in terms of instruments, most of these countries don't have large enough navies to be able to deploy a permanent presence in the Indian Ocean of great consequence. So they will look towards like-minded countries like India, Japan, the US, etc., to provide them the protection for their trade to go through smoothly. So that is one aspect of the Indian Ocean which needs to be understood. The trade dependencies have now transcended geographies, and global supply chains have become critical for the smooth functioning of the global economy. And therefore, the resilience of these global supply chains is an issue that has been addressed across most multinational and multilateral mechanisms in the Indian Ocean and the Indo-Pacific. What is actually critical is that there can be no disruption or interruption of any trade towards this region. I mean, most of the participants today would recall a couple of years ago when the MV Ever Given ran aground in the Suez Canal. And because of that, for almost 4 days, all shipping through the Suez Canal was blocked. And that one incident, however innocuous it may seem as a standalone event happening in some part of the world, disrupted global trade to the tune of $6 to $8 billion in just 3 days. So one can imagine if this disruption continues for longer, as we are seeing happening now, what is the sort of cascading effect it is going to have in the global economy in the future. India is by far the most preeminent naval power in the Indian Ocean. And not only as a naval and maritime power in the Indian Ocean, but also enjoys a very vantage position in the center, with its peninsular landmass, which juts out almost 1,000 miles into the center of the Indian Ocean and enables it to straddle most of the strategic sea lanes that pass across the Indian Ocean. Now, this is very critical because India, which I will come to later, is as what we call a net security provider, has a responsibility. This I will cover subsequently. India by itself is essentially a maritime nation. We have a very large coastline. Well, we've always called it a coastline, a continental coastline of 7,500 kilometers, But the new discourse on the region, when we take into account the island territories, we are talking about 13,000-kilometer coastline almost. We have an exclusive economic zone of over 2 million square kilometers. Now, this is going to be the source of this country's future sustenance. So we have to be very careful that we are able to secure our EEZ and ensure that we are able to not only secure it, but we are able to sustainably utilize it for the benefit of future economic benefit of India. 90% of our trade by volume and more than 75% by value travels over the sea. And 80% of our energy requirements are met from the sea. So the sea becomes extremely important to India. And even if you take the proportion, it is almost 55-45 of our trade from the west and the east respectively. So notwithstanding whether it's the west or the east, because of our position in the Indian Ocean, because we have two extensive sea spaces on either side, our trade from both sides is equally important, particularly our energy security, because the energy security can really, be a major stumbling block later if there is any disruption to it. Fortunately for us, a lot of our energy comes through the Straits of Hormuz, so we are not so badly affected by the disruption to trade in the Red Sea in terms of our energy requirements yet. But one never knows what is because of the kind of countries who are involved in this whole Red Sea imbroglio, it could very well start impacting other portions of the Indian Ocean as well and the Straits of Hormuz. But that is something we will have to wait and watch. A second very unique feature of the Indian Ocean is that it's bound by choke points. And as I mentioned, the Straits of Hormuz are critical for our energy. The Straits of Malacca are critical, not only for us, but for the for all the countries east of the Malacca Straits, including China. And that is why they call it the Malacca Dilemma. And of course, now the Bab el-Mandeb. Now, the Bab el-Mandeb is a waterway through which I have traversed twice when we were bringing submarines from the Soviet Union in the good old 80s. In fact, the first submarine we brought in 86, we even stopped at Yemen for 3 days. And Yemen in 86 had just undergone a sort of coup by the Russians. So there was a lot of turmoil in that country. In fact, when the ambassador invited us for dinner to his house, he was actually showing us bullet holes in his house, one right next to the telephone wall. So that was the sort of situation that prevailed over there. All the embassies had shifted to the Intercontinental Hotel because they didn't know at what short notice would they have to leave the country. So Yemen has been that entire Horn of Africa region has been a hotspot for some time now. It's not a new development. It's always been unstable. There have been issues with the countries in the Horn of Africa, Eritrea, Ethiopia, Yemen, as the ambassador brought out. Saudi Arabia's issues on ideological grounds, on religious grounds, on geopolitical reasons, all kinds of things. So that is a region that really is of critical concern. The problem with a choke point is that most choke points, because of their narrowness of their width, where in this case the Bab el-Mandeb, which is just about 30 kilometers, the ships have to follow something called traffic separation schemes. That means the ship has to be in a particular lane. It has very little room for maneuver, because if it maneuvers too much, it either goes into shallow water or impinges on the ships coming from the other side. And therefore, by virtue of the fact that they have to stick to more or less a straight line or a straight course or a particular fixed course, they are more vulnerable to an attack because they have very little room left for maneuver. And that is why perhaps it's easier to launch attacks on ships which are approaching and leaving or transiting through the Bab el-Mandeb than it is in an open ocean where they have room for maneuver and can operate out of the range of a missile or whatever it is that is coming at them. Another feature is that the Indian Ocean has about, I think, 39 littoral countries, but it's a very disaggregated region. And not only the disaggregated, West Asia is almost a separate geographical region, South Asia is separate, East Africa is separate, the island states do their own thing. But within that disaggregated sort of architecture, there is a lot of mutual distrust amongst nations. There is a lot of mutual animosity between nations. And therefore, it becomes, and this makes it very vulnerable to inimical external interests who would then come and exploit some of the weaknesses that they see in this region. And that is something that India has to be very concerned about as the preeminent maritime power. And it is very important, therefore, for India and the Indian Navy to always maintain a favorable maritime situation for itself in the Indian Ocean. This brings me to the second point about the current imbroglio in the Red Sea. We know what has caused it. Ambassador Menon has covered it in tremendous detail. So I won't waste my time. I won't, repeat what I was going to say. But what it has highlighted is the resurgence of both maritime terrorism and piracy. Now, this is something of great concern. When the Somali piracy was at its peak between 2008 and 2013, there was a very real fear at that time that an insurgent group operating in Somalia called Al-Shadab, Ambassador Menon will probably be able to give us the correct name, would link up with the pirates and create a maritime, and besides piracy, it would lead to a lot of maritime terrorism. Fortunately, that didn't happen because of whatever reasons internally there. But that was something that we were able to avert at that time. But there is no guarantee that it may resurface again. So that is something we have to be very careful about. Of course, the disruption that has been caused by the attacks on shipping in the Red Sea, which has led many major shipping companies to divert all their traffic around the Cape of Good Hope, has led to almost an additional 8,000 kilometers of distance, 8 to 10 days of transit, which has led not only to additional costs in terms of just this time in transit, but led to delayed shipments and basically a disruption of the global supply chains, which are a cause of great concern. Because if this continues for a long time, this cascading effect will have a far more deleterious effect on the global economy than what we have seen as of now. Even the ships which are venturing through the Red Sea are now paying prohibitive insurance premium. So in any case, even if they're able to save that money of going around the Cape of Good Hope, or they probably will save time, but not necessarily money if they come through the Red Sea and the Suez Canal. There seems to be at the moment no let-up in the attacks that are taking place on ships in the Red Sea. Every day we are hearing of at least 2 or 3 attacks, and 2 or 3 attacks being foiled by the naval forces present over there. And what is again worrying is that it's not just a stray sort of rocket attack by the Houthi rebels like we had seen initially, but now they are firing very sophisticated anti-ship cruise missiles and anti-ship ballistic missiles. Now, these technologies are not available to insurgent groups. Even many countries do not have these technologies. So it's a matter of concern as to where are they getting such an inexhaustible supply of such sophisticated weaponry. Is it, of course, a lot of American fingers are pointing at Iran, but is it only Iran? Does Iran have that sort of capacity to be able to supply such an inexhaustible supply of ASCMs and ASBMs? We really don't know, but that is something perhaps, it won't be in the open domain, but perhaps at the highest levels of government, there would be some indication as to where these are coming from or who's supplying them. But it's a matter of concern. And this has led to the US and UK now, counter-attacking Houthi possessions in Yemen. And so there's a lot of potential for escalation. And we really don't know where this is going to head ultimately. From the Indian perspective, the resurgence of piracy in the Western Indian Ocean and the Arabian Sea is very disturbing. Many may recall that 2008 to 2013 period when piracy was at its peak, Somalian piracy. And it took almost 20 navies deploying ships and working in tandem before this could be brought under control. It took almost 4 or 5 years. But notwithstanding the fact that piracy was brought under control, it had actually shifted eastwards, towards the Arabian Sea. And that entire Arabian Sea area had become a high-risk area. This high-risk area remained high-risk till almost 2016. Now, when area becomes a high-risk area, insurance premium goes up, freight rates go up, everything goes up. So the cascading effect of the problem that we are facing today, or the resurgence of piracy today, could be felt for a long time. And the very fact that MV Chem Pluto, one of the first ships to have been attacked by pirates, or we still don't know whom, by a drone attack, was just a little over 200 miles away from Porbandar. So already there was an effort to sort of reach this part of the world, which is something that the Indian Navy has to be very careful about. And that, I think, has led the Indian Navy to deploy an extremely, under normal circumstances, one would think this is a disproportionate sort of show of force. First, the Navy deployed 5 ships, increased that to 10 ships, and finally to 12 ships, including 4 guided missile destroyers and a few guided missile frigates, to just quell a threat from piracy. But obviously, the Indian Navy understood, or the government of India understood the gravity of the situation, and which necessitated such a response from the Indian Navy. So I think that is something we have to keep in mind, that this piracy needs to be nipped in the bud before it becomes something that will require a lot more effort to quell. 12% of global trade passes through the Red Sea. and the Western Indian Ocean. Now, this is a huge proportion. And like the ambassador brought up, 30% of container traffic. Now, this means, and these are all, this is all movement going to and fro from economies in the east to the economies in the west and vice versa. So this is also going to be a matter of great concern to us. And so the Houthi maritime terrorism and the Somali piracy could extract a huge price from the global economy if it is allowed to continue. Coming to the third point is India's position, which has again been highlighted by the ambassador. I think personally, I think India has done very well to not get involved in the Red Sea and focus on curbing piracy in the Indian Ocean, Arabian Sea, which is what affects us more directly at this point of time. Even though India has become a full member of the Combined Maritime Force, which is a large maritime force, comprising nations from all over the world, which includes 4 task forces. One of those task forces is operating in the Red Sea. One task force is for piracy. But the Indian Navy has, even though it's a full member now of the CMF, is now operating more or less standalone in curbing piracy in the Western Indian Ocean and the Arabian Sea. But I think it's good that we haven't got involved in the shooting game which is going on in the Red Sea. And I think the world understands why we are not getting involved in that also. So I don't think anyone is holding us to account as saying that we are not doing our bit. There have been stray mention of that, but I don't think at a geopolitical level, at a government diplomatic level, anyone is holding us to account for why are we not in the Red Sea. So in the last 2 months, India has ensured the safe passage of hundreds of ships, prevented the hijacking of ships, and escorted damaged ships to safety. The Indian naval ships are not, in fact, one of the positive outcomes of the last incidents of piracy, when the Somali piracy was there, that the Anti-Piracy Act in India has finally the Anti-Piracy Bill has finally become an act, which has strengthened the hands of the Indian Navy in being able to intercept, board, and examine and inspect suspected dhows, ships, etc., which is a very positive outcome and has enabled and definitely empowered the Indian Navy in its anti-piracy efforts. Now I'll come to my last point, which was mentioned, that India is a net security provider. See, India is, as again brought out, the Indian Navy is committed to ensuring a rules-based order in the Indian Ocean. It has proven its credentials on numerous occasions, as has been brought out in the region, and is considered today the preferred security partner in the region. Actually, this term net security provider has been used off and on over the last few years, but I don't think, personally, I'm not very comfortable with this term because it has neither been clearly defined anywhere, and nor I think is it clearly understood what exactly does that mean and what does India really have to do to be a net security provider. So Indian Navy also at times prefers the term preferred security partner rather than net security provider. Net security provider seems to be a more direct sort of term about the actions Indian Navy has to take. So the Navy also prefers the term preferred security partner, and that is what is primarily being used these days. But India, call it what you may, India takes its responsibility very, very seriously of being the preeminent Indian Ocean power, responsible for maintaining a rules-based order at sea, and being the first responder in times of crisis. The Indian Ocean region, as we all know, is very vulnerable not only to traditional and non-traditional kinetic threats, but it is also vulnerable to many effects of climate change. We have a lot of extreme weather events. There's a lot of political volatility in the region, which combined with these extreme weather events, which cause widespread loss and destruction of life and property, make these countries very vulnerable to external influences, which India, as a preferred security partner in the region, is duty bound or responsible to ensure that the security of the Indian Ocean region is maintained. In fact, ever since the tsunami of 2004, which was really the coming of age of India's HADR efforts, humanitarian assistance and disaster relief efforts, every Indian naval ship now carries relief material on board when it goes to sea. It's called a brick. It includes ration, it includes water, it includes medicines, it includes tents, etc., so that wherever crisis may occur, if there is an Indian naval ship operating in that part of the world, it can promptly be dispatched to provide initial succor to that country where the disaster has struck. And that is why we have now been firmly recognized as first responders in any crisis. This is a very positive outcome. Now, the Indian Navy has adopted, the last few years, has adopted something called a multi-mission deployment. Multi-mission deployment includes the deployment at any given time of 12 to 15 Indian naval ships across the Indo-Pacific for various operational reasons. They're at choke points, they're in the open ocean, they're there for maritime domain awareness, etc., etc. But because they're all carrying bricks and because they're spread out all over the Indian Ocean, they can be promptly rerouted and redeployed in case of a crisis where one of them is operating. So that has really reinforced India's HADR capability. Before I close, I'll just mention a quick word on diplomacy. India's very vital interests lie in West Asia. We're aware of that. Be it our energy requirements, with a lot of it coming from there, and equally important, the welfare of our huge diaspora. Remittances from the diaspora are one of our major sources of foreign exchange revenue. So that is another very important element, and we must always be conscious of the fact that we have a very large diaspora, which is a great strength for India, as we have seen recently when, I wouldn't say it was a bargaining chip, but certainly the Indian presence in the Indian diaspora presence in Qatar, the numbers and the contribution could have had a hand, could have played a role in ensuring the safe return of our naval veterans who were there. So that could be a factor. It is a factor. And anyway, their interests and their welfare is our responsibility. So we have to ensure that we are very conscious of what's happening in West Asia at all times. Initiatives like the INSTC, which is the North-South Trade Corridor, the development of Chabahar, again very important for us. The I2U2 mechanism. We are one of the few countries in the world, I think, which has successfully, with very, very deft diplomacy, had excellent relations with almost everybody in West Asia. Countries on totally opposite sides of the spectrum. Israel and Iran, for example, we have excellent relations with both of them. Excellent relations with Saudi Arabia. So that is a diplomatic strength we must leverage to our advantage in the region. And again, the more recent India, Middle East, Europe economic corridor, which is actually yet just an idea. There is not really very much that has happened physically to develop that, but it will over a period of time, perhaps once this whole Israel-Hamas issue settles down. These are all very important for India and for India retaining its preeminent position, because these are directly going to counter the Chinese efforts and the Chinese ambition of becoming the dominant maritime power in the Indian Ocean in a decade from now. So we have to take these initiatives at this stage to be able to counter what they are planning, let's say 10 years from now or 7 years from now, when they intend to have a large naval presence in the Indian Ocean. Our capacity building efforts have won us appreciation all around, whether it is our immediate maritime neighborhood or the larger sort of strategic neighborhood, including some of the small island states whose cause we have championed at various international fora, whether it was the G20 or the UN, for which they appreciate it, even though they're not always willing to show us that appreciation, as we're seeing in the Maldives. But certainly, in the heart of hearts, they know that India is the go-to country when they're in trouble. There is no two ways about that. As was mentioned, I think the Sagar policy, security and growth for all in the region, with the Prime Minister enunciated in 2015 during his visit to Mauritius, underpins most of our activities now that in the Indian Ocean region and the larger Indo-Pacific. And I think understanding it and implementing the Sagar policy would correctly and in full would really reinforce our status in the region as the sort of preferred security partner. Because of our good relationship with West Asia, I think India has a very important role to play in resolving the West Asian crisis. I'm sure we are doing it. It's not something that's probably in the open domain to the extent we would like, but certainly I'm sure there's a lot of back-channel diplomacy which must be at work. Ambassador Menon will probably be able to tell us more about how it works, but I'm sure it must be there. In fact, before I close, we are having a huge naval exercise in Visakhapatnam next week. It's called Menon. Menon started in 1994 as a 4-nation exercise in Port Blair. With nothing at sea, it was just 4 countries brought one ship, and we played volleyball, and we had social engagements and cultural engagements and sports engagements. That exercise from 1994 has grown now with 51 navies participating next week. And I think 20 odd navies are sending their ships. But what is remarkable is that this is one exercise where we have the American, the Russian, and the Iranian navies exercising together. Now, this is the power of Indian diplomacy and India's status as an Indian Ocean power, which is now being looked at to as a force, or as a force for good in the region. Thank you. That's all I have to say. I may have rambled a bit, but it was important to bring out these aspects. Thank you very much, and I'll be very happy to take on any questions that you might have. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Commodore, for the very illustrated views on the Indian naval capabilities. But there is one, if I may request you, one particular aspect, if you could touch upon in a few minutes. Today, as you put it very rightly, Indian Navy holds the responsibility both on the eastern seaboard as well as the western seaboard. And the numbers and the capability building you did speak on. However, sir, if you could just give us few words on the sustainability part of our effort, that will give us the little more in-depth in the capability of the Indian Navy. Sustainability means, sir, as you said, 15 ships on the either front when we deploy, the longer terms and the time span as such. So that's where I want you to reflect on a sustainability part, if you could, sir. Thank you.
Sir, I think the Indian Navy has maintained an unprecedented operational tempo now over more than a decade. And that speaks volumes not only for the capability of the Indian Navy, the people at sea actually on board, but also to complete the maintenance structure within the country, the dry docks, the dockyards. And I think if you take all that put together, the Navy has focused on ensuring this capability, the sustainability of this capability. It's not a one-off that we've sent so many ships out at sea. We have not only been able to deploy ships, our aircraft are patrolling the skies all the time. Our maritime domain awareness is at an all-time high. And I think the Navy is very conscious of its limitations. If you see the future shipbuilding programs, they're all focused on developing the kind of capability, whether it's LPDs, whether it's more fleet support ships. We've got 5 fleet support ships that are being built. Is all about ensuring that the Indian Navy has the reach and the sea legs to sustainably project power anywhere in the Indian Ocean that it may be required to do so. So I don't think we'll be ever found wanting in that, for the simple reason that the Navy is conscious of that and it understands what may be the requirement 5 or 7 years from now. Perhaps, and this is slightly digressing from the subject, perhaps what we need to do more is, and that is more from the security challenge, is that there are certain capability, I won't say gaps, but they're deficits because of delays in programs getting implemented, lack of adequate shipbuilding capacity in the country, the ecosystem not yet fully, the indigenous ecosystem not yet fully matured, which could constrain our capacity in terms of shipbuilding. But that is something that the Indian Navy is looking at very seriously. The government of India is looking at very seriously. They're talking of, most of the shipyards in the country are being augmented in capacity so that they can take on more shipbuilding. New shipyards are private industries being encouraged to get into shipbuilding now. So all these are aimed at basically ensuring that we are able to develop our shipbuilding capability. This year, the capital budget, I think, for the Navy is 19.71%, which is unprecedented. I don't think the Indian Navy has ever got 19% of the defense budget, the capital budget. This year, we've got that budget. And we've got that budget because we've got programs which need the money. And so I think overall, there is a great maritime consciousness in the country that the sea is important to India. The Indian Ocean is important. This is where the future great game is going to be played. Great power contestation is going to happen here. And notwithstanding our, two continental neighbors constantly sniping at our heels, which requires a lot of attention also, the importance of the Navy is well understood. And I think these capability gaps, which are there, a few of them, will get addressed. Of course, we are limited by our resources. It's that guns versus butter debate, which will never be over. But notwithstanding that, I think we've done well. We're doing well. Thank you.
Commodore, thank you so much, Commodore, for your illustrated comments. It gives a better perspective for us. Kalpana, now may I request you to take on and monitor the questions so that we can take the relevant questions in, say, next 10 to 15 minutes. Over to you. Thank you.
Sure, sir. Thank you, sir. Sir, we have few questions from the audience, and the first question is from Eric Elkins. The question is, I would be interested to hear the esteemed speaker describe their view of the current stance of China in relation to this Red Sea crisis. How do China's stance and action or inaction in this crisis impact India?
Ambassador sir, may I request you to kindly address it?
Well, China, of course, our main, India's most comprehensive military coordination in the Indo-Pacific has been with the United States, and it's basically tuned towards the threat that has been posed by the Chinese. What we have seen is that in the past several decades, Chinese aggressive behavior, especially with regard to our neighbors, what happened in Hambantota, and there have been some incidents where Chinese ships have come over calling without an invitation. So these are areas where I think we have been able to withstand at least the pressure that have what have the United States among all its allies. The India-US Malabar exercise, which is specifically aimed at joint
So we can't hear you, sir.
Am I audible?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
So we can't hear you.
Am I audible?
Now we can hear you, sir. I think, Kalpana, with the technological issue at the ambassador's end, you take on the next question, and when he fixes the glitch, we probably could come back to the question.
Sure, sir.
Please go to the next question.
Sure, sir. So, second question is asked by Pooja K. The question is, I would like to request the speaker to speak on the alternative options that India has to protect its economy by putting pressure on Israel to cease killing civilians in Gaza and West Bank, which would alleviate the situation.
Commodore sir, basically this question relates to India's ability to take on the situation in the region. So if you could kindly address, I'll be grateful.
I think India has taken a very calibrated response to this entire Israel-Hamas conflict. If you notice initially when it started, India has a very principled stand on terrorism and terrorism in all its forms, and there's zero tolerance for it. So I think from that point of view, it sort of sided with Israel at that time, or so we felt. But I think it was not so much siding with Israel because we've had good relations with the Palestine Liberation Organization also for many years. I think it was more about terrorism. And India, that is one thing on which India is not willing to compromise its stand when it comes to terrorism. From a perspective of it's not about to cease killing civilians in Gaza. It's more about ending the conflict, because Israel is, Mr. Netanyahu has made it very clear what his ultimate intention is, to sort of destroy Hamas once and for all. So whether we can get them to stop the hostilities is one thing, but certainly we can play a mediation role in that. And I think while we may not be doing it very overtly, probably there is a lot being, there would be Indian involvement. If you remember, the External Affairs Minister recently made a statement saying that there is no crisis in the world in which India is not consulted, which is probably indicates that certainly we are being consulted, certainly our views are being taken, certainly our good offices are being used. And that will probably lead to the External Affairs Minister also visiting Tehran, where again, he brought up this subject, and towards, not supporting this sort of this terrorist-based thing. India has also taken a stand on the killing of civilians without directly sort of implicating Israel. It has said that it is not happy about what is happening in the region. So India is taking a very calibrated stance. I think that's about what India can do. I mean, we can't get directly involved in the conflict. We have no reason to get directly involved in the conflict. But I mean, I think we're doing what we should be doing, and we're doing enough of it. I don't think we can really get more involved in sort of any direct, either personal and physical involvement or any kinetic involvement in this conflict, except use our good officers to try and mediate a solution of some kind.
Thank you, Commodore. Kalpana, just give me a minute.
Sure.
Pooja, we have to understand and appreciate any global crisis or a global conflict is never a black and white. There are a lot of gray areas in that particular aspect. And it is the ability of the nation in addressing those gray areas which matters the most. And in my opinion, as Commodore Anil Jaisingh brought out, we cannot and will never support any operation where terrorism is being glorified or being supported. Because if we make a mistake of directly telling Israel to refrain from attacking and going on a peace note, then tomorrow if terrorism comes to our doorstep, the global people will come back to us saying that whatever advice you are given to Israel, it's now time for you to follow that. So as Commodore Anil has said, it is a very tight diplomatic walk. We have to diplomatically use our prowess to ensure that things happen in the right way. On Ukraine war also, we have sort of refrained, but we have conveyed the message to even President Putin, very crystal clear. Same we have done to Israel. So we must appreciate the tightrope walk which Indian diplomacy is doing today. And Commodore Anil Jaisingh has really brought out what is the stature of our country. Have you ever heard 51 nations participating in Menon, wherein Russia, Iran, and USA coming together? That's what speaks of India's capabilities. I would like to stop here. Thank you.
If I may just add a point to the first question which was asked, I don't know if Ambassador Menon is
Yeah,
reconnected back.
I am back
Please, sir.
now. Back now.
The only point I'd like to make is that, you know, in the Red Sea crisis, China has been sort of not taking an active stand, let me put it that way, because they probably have a conflict of interest in saying what we want them to say. But this dents China's own credibility as an emerging big power at a time when it is trying to create an alternate power structure, when it's trying to create an alternate world order, and is actively sort of engaging with West Asia. Its reticence and silence on this issue is not doing its own reputation any good. Because if a country aspires to be a global superpower, then it must take responsibility for that that role. So China wants all the power, but is not willing to take the responsibility. America takes the responsibility. It gets big bags for it, it gets bouquets for it, but it does take responsibility to kind of solve a problem. So I think from my personal view is that China is not doing its own sort of cause any good by not being more sort of proactive in addressing this Red Sea crisis. But that is just a personal opinion.
I just would like to also add to this what I mean, I was not able to, reach out in my earlier response on the Chinese aggression. Is it, am I audible now?
Yes.
In fact, the Chinese have continued with the aggressive expansionist doctrine in their policies by basically opting to continue with enlarging the naval presence in the maritime regions around the Indian coastline, something which I mentioned about Hambantota and Maldives. In addition to this, the Chinese have gone in for rampant economic investments in India's neighborhood as a means to basically check India's growing influence in the region. And as part of its BRI initiative, the Belt and Road Initiative, China has brought in huge investments in India's neighborhood, in Sri Lanka, Pakistan, for sure, Maldives, Nepal, and Bangladesh. And the Chinese have also been aggressively acquiring bases in the sea lines of communication, which in naval terms, you call it the SLOCs, I think, in the Indian Ocean. Examples like this are the Hambantota port in Sri Lanka, the Gwadar port in Pakistan. And Just as a response to this, or maybe, I mean, it's a weak response, definitely, I would agree. That on its part, India has also offered aid and investments to countries such as Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, and Maldives to overcome their economic woes in recent times. So, but of course, as you had mentioned, these responses have not been paid back, or maybe at least it has not gained that right traction as the Chinese are able to extract from their huge mammoth investments in these countries. But for India, from the Quad point of view, the Quad certainly is seen as a viable counterbalance to China in the Indo-Pacific region. Similarly, India has been proactive pursuing its Act East policy by cooperating with countries like Japan, Australia, and the United States in providing aid, investment, and security to the region. So the importance of the Indian Ocean is very much there as far as China is concerned, and that's where I think we need to play a little more proactive role in terms of trying to contain their influence here, because obviously it is our backyard, and we have to be very careful, which you had mentioned before. So that is it.
Thank you, sir. Kalpana, one last question, please, because we do have the time constraints also. Thank
Sure,
you.
sure. So last question is asked by Argesh Kolkar. The question is, during the budget speech, Honorable Finance Minister had talked about the I2-U2 grouping. What would be the possible effect of this crisis on the future of I2-U2 grouping?
Commodore, as you had addressed the I2-U2, can you just reflect on it? So probably you are muted, we can't hear you.
The I2U2, I think, is a very forward-looking initiative and very integral part of India's, well, Act West policy, if I may call it that. You know, for many years, we were focusing a lot on the East. We were probably not paying as much attention to the West, but that has changed now. And so from two perspectives, firstly, it brings together countries like the UAE, Israel, India, and the US. We are also looking at a deeper relationship with Saudi Arabia. We're trying to bring Saudi Arabia and the UAE and all together into another sort of grouping. So I think from that perspective, as part of our overall diplomatic engagement and our foreign policy outreach, it's a very, very positive step towards consolidating our presence, Indian influence and presence in this region. And of course, countering whatever China might do in the years to come. Both the IMEC and the I2U2 are going to be very, very effective mechanisms to counter future Chinese attempts at influencing or changing the course of, influencing that region per se, in terms of being able to offer its economic largesse or economic inducement or its naval diplomacy, its economic diplomacy, etc. So that's all I can say about the I2U2, that it's a very positive initiative. The effect of the crisis on that, well, at the moment, I don't think it has any direct effect. Everyone's waiting and watching, but it could be a very effective mechanism to sort of mediate a solution between or a resolution of this crisis in the region, because it includes two countries which are part of that region, and it could kind of prevail upon Israel to maybe look at a ceasefire from a humanitarian perspective, which of course the Israeli Prime Minister presently is not particularly inclined towards doing. He's walked out of the talks in Cairo, if I understand correctly, this evening or earlier today. So it can play a role, but how effective it will be, considering this intransigence of the Israeli Prime Minister in not willing to listen to anybody suggesting a ceasefire or a compromise. Well, we'll have to wait and watch. That's my view. I don't know what more can the I2U2 do at this point of time to resolve this crisis.
Thank you, Commodore, for the candid answer. And Kalpana, before I give the floor back to you, Ambassador Sir and Commodore Jai Singh, it was absolutely an honor and a pleasure coordinating this session with the two experts who have painted a very vivid picture for the people to understand the current crisis and what's the problem, what needs to be done, and how it can be done. It's a very broad canvas which we have been able to cover with the two of the experts here. And my thanks to both of you for your illustrated views. And I also appreciate the quality of the questions which have been raised by our audience, which really reflects on the attentiveness and the awareness of our people. Thank you so much. Thank you, Indic, for giving me opportunity for chairing this session. Over to you, Kamala. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. With this, we have come to an end of this insightful and timely discussion. I, on behalf of Indic Researchers Forum, would like to thank the session chair, Commodore Deshmukh sir, and distinguished speakers, Ambassador Srikumar Menon and Commodore Anil Singh, for their insightful talk. Also, grateful to our audience for attending the session. The recording of this session will be uploaded on our YouTube channel in next 48 hours. Do follow our social media handles for our future events. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.